True leadership isn't about dominance, charisma, or commanding attention. It's about mastering the self, especially in moments of pressure. One of the greatest challenges a leader faces is not the external crisis, but the internal storm, anger. The Stoics saw anger not as strength, but as a kind of temporary madness. And for those entrusted with influence or responsibility, unchecked anger is poison. It damages trust, clouds judgment, and destroys clarity. Seneca wrote an entire essay on anger, warning that no plague has cost the human race more. To the Stoics, controlling anger wasn't about repressing emotions, but about understanding them, recognizing the space between stimulus and response. A wise leader, in Stoic terms, is one who doesn't let the fire of anger burn bridges, but transforms that energy into thoughtful, calm action. These 10 techniques are not about becoming emotionless, but about cultivating emotional wisdom, the kind that keeps teams together and decisions clean. 1. Take a pause before you react. One of the most powerful techniques in Stoic philosophy, used not just by ancient thinkers but also by modern leaders, is the art of pausing before reacting. This may sound simple, even trivial, but in the heat of the moment, when anger surges like fire through your chest and your mind races to retaliate, doing nothing, even for just a few seconds, requires an extraordinary kind of strength. It is, in fact, the first and often the most essential act of self-mastery. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, once wrote, "How much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it?" He understood that the emotion itself is rarely the issue. It's the uncontrolled reaction that follows. And this is where the pause becomes a shield. When you take even a brief moment to step back mentally, to delay that sharp word or impulsive action, you begin to shift from reaction to response. You reclaim your agency. In modern neuroscience, this aligns with how the brain works. Anger activates the amygdala, the primal part of the brain wired for fight or flight. But when you pause, when you breathe and reflect, you give the prefrontal cortex a chance to intervene. This is the part of the brain responsible for rational thinking, empathy, and long-term planning. In essence, the pause gives reason a fighting chance. The Stoics practiced this not only in words, but in routine. Seneca, for example, would review his entire day before sleep, noting moments when he allowed emotion to override reason. He wasn't punishing himself, he was training for tomorrow. And today's leaders can do the same. In boardrooms, political negotiations, or even family disputes, the ability to pause has been the difference between diplomacy and disaster. Think about it. When was the last time you regretted not reacting? More often than not, our regrets stem from acting too quickly, saying things we didn't mean, making decisions clouded by rage, damaging relationships that took years to build. But when you pause, you create a pocket of clarity, a space to ask, is this who I want to be? Taking a pause isn't weakness. It's not avoidance. It is a demonstration of inner discipline. It's the choice to observe your anger instead of being consumed by it. It's the leader who sits in silence during provocation, the parent who listens instead of shouting, the individual who decides that dignity is more powerful than dominance. Reflection. To pause is not to suppress emotion, but to understand it. Anger is not your enemy, it is your teacher, but only if you have the courage to listen before you act. In a world that demands immediate reactions, pausing is a revolutionary act of wisdom. As the Stoics would remind us, you cannot control what others do, but you can always control the space between their action and your response. That space is where your power lives. 2. Remember that emotion is a choice, not an obligation. One of the most liberating truths taught by Stoic philosophy is this: your emotions are not imposed upon you, they are chosen by you. In the thick of daily stress, insults, injustice, or betrayal, this statement might feel outrageous. How can anger be a choice when it rushes into our chest without warning? How can disappointment or rage be optional when they feel so natural and justified? But this is exactly where the Stoics challenge our assumptions. Epictetus, once a slave who became one of the most influential Stoic teachers, said, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them." He emphasized that the external event, whether someone disrespects you, lies about you, or treats you unfairly, is just that, an event. The emotion that follows is not a law of physics. It is your interpretation, your internal response, your mental framing. To the Stoics, this framing is where our power lies. Let's take a modern example. You receive a harsh email. It's rude, passive-aggressive, and maybe even unprofessional. Your initial impulse is to be offended, angry, defensive. But then you pause, and you ask, is this email truly offensive, or am I choosing to interpret it that way? Could it be that the sender is having a bad day? Could it be that your ego is inflating the insult? Or could it be that you simply don't need to give this the power to ruin your peace? This reframing doesn't mean you suppress emotion. It means you hold it up to the light and inspect it before giving it free rein over your mind. Leaders who internalize this idea gain enormous strength. Instead of being dragged around by emotions like a boat in a storm, they become the anchor. They might feel anger, yes, but they ask, is this anger helpful? Will it serve me or the situation? If not, they let it pass. Like a wave that hits but doesn't drown. This level of discipline doesn't develop overnight. It requires the daily training of awareness, catching yourself in the moment, reminding yourself, I can feel anger without acting on it. I can acknowledge it and still choose peace. That is true emotional freedom. Because when emotions are seen as mandatory, we live like victims. But when we see emotions as choices, we reclaim authorship of our inner world. We realize we don't have to explode every time we're triggered. We don't have to retaliate just because we're hurt. We are not puppets pulled by emotion. We are sovereign beings who can observe, reflect, and choose. Reflection. Your anger is not your identity. Your sadness is not your destiny. Every emotion you experience is a visitor, not a master. To practice Stoicism is to stand at the doorway of your mind and ask, do I really want to let this in? Do I want to feed this emotion or release it? True strength lies in choosing the emotion that serves your highest self, not the one that screams the loudest. 3. Reflecting on the consequences of uncontrolled anger. In the heat of the moment, anger feels righteous. It feels powerful. It gives us the illusion that we are taking control, raising our voice, slamming a door, sending a furious message, or delivering a harsh comeback. But the Stoics ask us not to judge emotions by how they feel in the moment, but by what they cause in the long run. Uncontrolled anger is a fire that burns indiscriminately. It might start by targeting others, but soon it consumes us too. Our reputation, our relationships, our clarity, our peace of mind. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, wrote in his Meditations, "How much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it?" In other words, what happens because of our anger is often far worse than what caused it in the first place. Imagine a leader who lashes out in frustration during a meeting. Maybe it was a valid concern. Someone failed to deliver, or a team member made a critical mistake. But in that instant of rage, the leader loses something valuable. respect, trust, and the opportunity to teach through example. The emotional release may last a few minutes, but the relational damage can take months or never be repaired. This is why Stoics urge us to think beyond the moment. When anger knocks on the door, don't just react. Pause and project. Project forward. Ask yourself, what will this outburst solve? What will I regret later? Who will I hurt? And is it worth it? This reflection isn't about suppressing anger or pretending it doesn't exist. Anger is a natural emotion, but the Stoic approach teaches us to domesticate it, to be its master, not its servant. We're reminded that every time we act on unchecked fury, we trade something valuable: our integrity, our influence, and sometimes even our future. Think about the many stories in history where great leaders fell because they couldn't manage their rage. From emperors to CEOs to military generals, the inability to control one's temper has been the downfall of many powerful figures. And yet, the ones who learned to pause, breathe, and consider the ripple effect of their anger often rose above conflict and inspired loyalty instead of fear. Even in personal life, a single angry comment can scar a relationship. A thoughtless insult said in fury can echo in someone's heart for years. And perhaps most tragically, anger can cloud our judgment so much that we become the very thing we once hated. Reflection. Anger is a spark. It can light a candle or burn down a home. The Stoic path invites you to pause long enough to see which one you're holding. Will you illuminate the situation with wisdom or scorch it with your temper? The choice is yours, and your future often depends on that very choice. 4. Training patience through small daily frustrations. Many people believe patience is something you're either born with or not. But the Stoics saw patience differently. Not as a trait, but as a skill. One that could be trained and sharpened like a muscle. And like any skill, the best way to develop it isn't in grand, dramatic moments, but in the small, seemingly trivial irritations of daily life. Standing in a slow-moving line, waiting for a delayed train, dealing with poor internet connection, listening to someone take too long to make their point, getting cut off in traffic. These are the minor inconveniences that test our patience. Not because they are significant in themselves, but because they expose how easily we lose control when we don't get what we want, when we want it. The Stoics believe these moments are not interruptions to life. They are the training ground. Seneca, a Roman Stoic philosopher, taught that no man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. And while adversity might come in many forms, everyday frustrations are where we are constantly given the opportunity to prove ourselves, over and over again. How we respond to these small triggers determines whether we're preparing ourselves for greater storms or setting ourselves up to be defeated by them. Let's think of patience like a spiritual push-up. Each time you resist the urge to snap at the barista for getting your order wrong, you've done one repetition. Each time you smile at the person who bumps into you without apologizing, you've lifted the emotional weight. Each time you choose not to roll your eyes, not to sigh loudly, not to fume over someone else's delay, you've made yourself stronger. Leaders who embody patience don't just wait, they wait well. They don't let minor frustrations dictate their tone, their energy, or their attitude. Instead, they recognize each test of patience as a micro-opportunity to reinforce calm, clarity, and dignity. And here's the Stoic secret. If you can master your reaction in small situations, you are far more likely to remain composed when the truly big challenges arrive. You don't build fortitude by accident. You build it by practicing restraint when no one else is watching, when the stakes seem low, when it would be easy to justify a bad mood. Reflection. Every small frustration, is a silent invitation from the universe asking, will you react or will you grow? True strength isn't about power or control. It's about how calmly you carry yourself when life doesn't go your way. In a world addicted to urgency, practicing patience is a revolutionary act. 5. Reframing the trigger, shifting perspective on emotional situations. One of the core teachings of Stoicism, and one of its most empowering, is that it's not events themselves that disturb us, but our judgment about them. This is the lesson of Epictetus, who taught that nothing outside of our own minds has the power to hurt us, unless we allow it to. Imagine this. You're walking into an important meeting. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Your coffee spills. A colleague makes a passive-aggressive comment. In any of these situations, the typical reaction might be frustration, offense, even rage. But the Stoic doesn't ask, why did this happen to me? Instead, they ask, what does this really mean? What story am I telling myself about this? Here's where reframing becomes a superpower. When someone offends you, it's easy to believe that they wronged you. But what if you chose to believe they're acting out of pain, ignorance, or insecurity, not malice? When plans fall apart, you might feel everything is ruined. But what if it's simply an opportunity to practice flexibility? When someone disagrees with you, instead of seeing it as an attack, what if it's a chance to sharpen your thinking? Reframing isn't about denial or toxic positivity. It's about mental agility, the ability to reinterpret a situation in a way that strengthens rather than weakens you. Great leaders, especially Stoic ones, train themselves to pause between stimulus and response and ask, is there another way to see this? Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the most powerful Stoic of all, constantly reminded himself that the obstacle in his path was not a punishment, but a teacher. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This mindset is not natural for most, but it can be learned. It can be chosen. Modern neuroscience even supports this ancient wisdom. The act of reframing a situation activates the prefrontal cortex, the rational executive part of our brain, calming the emotional limbic system. In other words, when we consciously choose a new interpretation, we regain control over our emotional state. In practical terms, here's how you can apply this. When someone criticizes you, reframe it as feedback or a test of composure. When delayed, reframe it as unexpected time to breathe or reflect. When plans fail, reframe it as the world guiding you elsewhere. With each conscious reframing, you pull the power back into your own hands. You become less of a puppet to circumstances and more the author of your internal experience. Reflection. Life doesn't get easier, but your lens can get clearer. By changing how you see a situation, you change how it affects you. The next time you feel provoked, ask yourself, is there a more empowering story I could tell myself right now? Because the story you choose becomes the life you live. 6. Repeating calming phrases in the mind. In the heat of the moment, when emotions are raw and your heart is pounding, words can become anchors. Stoic leaders, those who lead not just others, but first and foremost themselves, often relied on simple, deliberate inner dialogue to stay centered in the storm. They knew that language doesn't just express thought, it shapes it. The Stoics practiced repeating calming phrases or mantras internally as a way to halt emotional spirals and return to reason. This isn't just poetic, it's neurological. When you repeat certain phrases, you override the flood of stress hormones with focused mental intent. You move from the chaos of emotion into a sanctuary of clarity. Marcus Aurelius, in his private journal meditations, often reminded himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He wasn't writing this for the world. He was writing it for himself, likely in moments when he wanted to scream, retaliate, or shut down. These words were his shield. You too can create your own Stoic shield. For example, in a moment of rising anger, you might say internally, "This moment will pass. I do not have to act on every emotion. Let me be bigger than this. Peace is always an option. What matters is how I respond." These phrases are like rails that keep your mental train from derailing. With repetition, they become automatic, showing up precisely when your mind wants to run wild. This technique is powerful because it gives the brain something to do while the body is reacting. Instead of feeding anger with more angry thoughts, you're giving it a different fuel, one of awareness, composure, and strength. And this isn't about suppressing anger, but transforming it. You're not pretending the emotion doesn't exist. You're choosing to relate to it differently. You're becoming the observer, not the reactor. It's worth noting that even elite athletes, military leaders, and monks across cultures use similar techniques. From the Stoic emperor to the Zen master, the wisdom is shared. When your breath becomes shallow, your fists clench, and your mind races. Pause, breathe, and repeat something that calms you. What you say internally becomes the rhythm of your nervous system. And the calmer your internal language, the more stable your external behavior. Reflection. Your thoughts are not random. They are trainable. And your internal dialogue is either your weapon or your wound. So the next time rage knocks on your door, whisper something gentle instead. Because mastering your words in private moments will help you master the world in public ones. 7. Writing down your anger in a journal for reflection. When anger burns hot in the chest, it demands release. The instinct is to shout, to retaliate, to make it known. But the Stoics taught that one of the most powerful ways to express anger is not to hurl it at others, but to write it down. Journaling was central to the Stoic practice. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome, kept a daily journal not to impress others, but to discipline his own mind. In those pages, he questioned his reactions, explored his triggers, and dissected his thoughts. He turned his anger into insight, his pain into philosophy. Writing your anger isn't an act of weakness or suppression. It's a way of taking ownership. When you journal, you're telling yourself, "I choose to understand this emotion instead of being consumed by it." You create distance between you and the emotion, allowing space for clarity to emerge. This practice turns your journal into a mirror. It allows you to see your thoughts as they are, not as they scream inside your head. You begin to notice patterns, the same frustrations, the same insecurities, the same stories you keep telling yourself. And once you're aware, you're no longer enslaved by them. Here's how Stoic journaling for anger might work in practice. You write the event. What happened? You write your initial emotion. How did I feel? Then you reflect, what was I expecting? Why did this trigger me? Was it worth it? And finally, you reframe. What would a wise person do in this situation? This isn't just about venting, it's about transforming. Each sentence you write becomes an act of reclaiming power over your inner world. Over time, you'll find your anger softening, not because the world is gentler, but because you are stronger, even if no one reads it. Journaling becomes a silent conversation between you and your better self. It's the place where leaders sharpen their wisdom, not in public speeches, but in private pages. When the mind is clouded, writing brings light. When emotions surge, journaling offers a quiet shoreline. And when fury threatens to define you, the page lets you redefine yourself. Reflection. You don't always need to explain your anger to the world. Sometimes, explaining it to yourself is the most courageous thing you can do. Because in the solitude of writing, You learn to speak more gently with others and with yourself. 8. Focus on what you can control, not what you cannot. One of the most profound Stoic principles is deceptively simple. Focus only on what you can control. Yet in its simplicity lies an immense power, especially when dealing with anger. Anger often flares when reality defies our expectations. Someone cuts us off in traffic. A colleague disrespects us. A loved one disappoints us. And in a split second, we feel our emotions hijacked by the need to react, correct, or retaliate. But pause and ask, did I ever truly have control over their behavior? The Stoics draw a sharp boundary between two realms, what is up to us and what is not. Our opinions, judgments, actions, and choices, these are ours. But other people's attitudes, external outcomes, the past, and even most of the future, those are outside our command. Trying to control what we never owned is like trying to stop the tide with bare hands. When you train yourself to focus only on what you can control, you disarm anger at its root. You stop demanding that the world bend to your will, and instead, you bend your mind to accept the world as it is. This is not passivity, it's wisdom. It's learning to say, I cannot stop them from lying, but I can remain honest. I cannot force them to respect me, but I can act with dignity. I cannot control how the world sees me, but I can choose how I carry myself. Great leaders operate from this inner locus of control. They don't waste energy chasing the uncontrollable. They channel it inward toward building character, discipline, and peace. In moments of anger, ask yourself, is this truly within my control? What response honors my values? How can I protect my peace regardless of their chaos? You'll find that much of what angers you isn't personal. It's just life being life. When you accept this, your emotional landscape becomes calmer, like a lake no longer disturbed by every passing wind. The ultimate Stoic mastery is not to control others, but to control how you respond to them. That's where your freedom lives. That's where your power begins. Reflection. Trying to control the uncontrollable is the fastest path to frustration, but choosing your response, calmly, consciously, wisely, is how you reclaim your power. Let the world be chaotic if it must. Let you be still within. 9. Avoiding unproductive arguments. In a world addicted to being right, silence is often mistaken for weakness. But to the Stoics, restraint in the face of provocation is not a sign of surrender. It is a mark of mastery. Unproductive arguments are everywhere. You'll find them in office politics, in social media debates, at dinner tables, and even within your own thoughts. They usually begin with ego and end in exhaustion. Nothing gets resolved. Minds remain unchanged. Only resentment lingers. The Stoics knew this. Epictetus once said, "If someone is able to provoke you, realize that your mind is complicit." He wasn't saying we should never speak up for ourselves, but rather that we must choose wisely when and how we engage. Not every disagreement deserves our energy. When a person argues not to understand, but to dominate, they aren't interested in truth. They want control. When someone's goal is to provoke rather than to connect, your silence speaks louder than your words. Why waste your peace trying to win over those who aren't even listening? Great leaders and wise thinkers know this. Not every hill is worth dying on. Instead of rushing into verbal combat, they pause. They ask, what outcome do I actually want from this? Is this discussion moving toward clarity or toward chaos? Am I feeding the ego or practicing reason? Avoiding an argument doesn't mean you lack conviction. It means you value clarity over conflict. It means you've chosen influence over ego. You've chosen the path of the Stoic, Seneca warned. It is better to receive a slight, than to give one. The one who walks away from a toxic debate walks away with dignity. The one who stays to escalate often loses both the point and their peace. This isn't about silence born from fear. This is about silence born from strength. A calm refusal to be dragged into storms that serve no one, help no one, and leave everyone emptier. If a conversation lacks mutual respect, mutual listening, or mutual purpose, then it is not a conversation, it's a performance. And you don't have to be part of that show. Reflection. Your time and attention are sacred. Not every fight deserves your presence. Not every word deserves a reply. The wisest thing you can say in some moments is nothing. In the silence, you reclaim your power and preserve your peace. 10. Remember that everyone is fighting their own battles. In the stillness of Stoic wisdom, we are reminded of a powerful truth. The people around us are not just background characters in our story. They are the main characters of their own lives, each carrying burdens we cannot see. The person who cuts in line may be rushing to care for a sick child. The coworker who snaps at you may be grieving a recent loss. The distant friend might be silently battling anxiety or despair. Our anger often stems from judging what we see on the surface. We respond to a single rude word, a cold glance, a small mistake, without knowing the storm that may be raging inside the other person. This is what separates the wise from the reactive. The ability to hold judgment and consider the unseen. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Whenever you are about to find fault with someone, ask yourself, what fault of mine most closely resembles that which I am about to criticize?" Great leaders don't use control to assert power. They use empathy to demonstrate strength. They understand that people are struggling in ways that may never be spoken aloud. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Why does this matter when it comes to anger? Because when you realize you're not the only one in pain, you stop centering the world around your own wounds. You begin to open space for understanding, for compassion, and most importantly, for self-control. Being stoic doesn't mean tolerating abuse or ignoring disrespect. It means having the clarity to see that sometimes, behind the sharpest edges is a soul that's simply lost, tired, or broken. To be stoic is to choose wisely, to know when to stand firm and when to let go. Sometimes the strongest response isn't a counterattack, but silence, patience, or even kindness. And that strength comes from the awareness that everyone you meet is fighting a silent war of their own. Reflection. When you remember that everyone is carrying something heavy, your anger begins to soften into understanding. Before you judge, pause. Before you react, breathe. Behind every harsh word, there may be a wounded heart. Behind every cold act, a weary soul. Choose compassion, not because they always deserve it, but because you deserve peace. To lead like a Stoic is to remain unmoved by provocation, but not indifferent. It's to notice the first rise of heat in the chest, and to pause, to breathe, to choose. Anger may knock, but the wise leader doesn't always open the door. These 10 techniques are reminders, not of weakness, but of the higher strength it takes to stay calm while others lose their heads. In the end, a Stoic leader understands that the battle is not outside, but within. And each time anger is transformed into calm clarity, it becomes a quiet victory. Authority rooted in peace commands more than force ever could. And the one who governs their own emotions becomes fit to guide others, not with noise, but with quiet power and unwavering reason.